This is Duke University.
I just want to explain quickly that Biquini Wax begins as an independent collaborative project that starts as a more spontaneous coming together of artists based around exhibits in a domestic space for several years, and we'll look at some examples. Then Biquini Wax begins to host a variety of collective dynamics that include collective curatorial, textual, ontological, pedagogical, and discussion-based strategies. And that's when the Jacuzzis and art and labor begin to form part of what Biquini Wax is today. So there's a transformation of the space that was once dedicated to straightforward artistic production into one which incorporates a consideration of the critical and economic framework in which it exists.
But like a month ago, the 19th of September, a really big earthquake shake us all. And I was thinking about what happens in the civil and social response and what happens in the artistic scenes. How can we respond or answer to that? So Biquini Wax started in this quarter that it's called Escandón. And it was a house where 4 people lived. And what started to happen is that the intimacy
began to overwhelm.
Yeah, began to overwhelm like the domestic space, right? So everything happened in the house. The parties, like really, really wild, big parties, the exhibitions, and people living in there. And there was things about being really organic about the functioning of the art space.
So it created this very particular, very intimate relationship that was throughout the region, but also transnationally.
And it's important to say that the name of Biquini Wax was transformed and add the subtitle Temple of Subcritical Studies, because now it's a sanctuary to construct knowledge collectively and with this kind of activities, performances, classes.
But you can see in the transition of spaces and the adoption of this new term, this idea of Biquini Wax as a sacred space for subcritical studies, for situated explorations of what it means to be in a Mexican context and reflect not only on the material circumstances of artistic production, but the textual, the economic, the ontological, the epistemological realities that also become primary materials.
We're really interested in social theory, but from a really organic and playful perspective. We were trying to read a Peruvian art critic called Juanacha. He was born in 1950. He started to work in Mexico during the 70s, and maybe he was one of the artists of the critics that started to think the sort of conceptual practices in Mexico. I mean, we've been working a lot on this guy, but we were interested in 3 concepts. One is mágico-feudalismo, sort of magical feudal stuff. Feudalism, yeah. And which was his description of underdevelopment, a negative description of what does underdevelopment means in the 70s. And we're trying to rearticulate this concept in a positive way. Another concept that we were really trying to articulate was a concept invented by H2, action writing, which we articulate in a conference that we're going to talk about it after Natalia's intervention. And the other one was a subcritical, a concept that came from chemistry.
And we recovered Juanacha because he worked on this museum during the 70s. And nowadays, this history has been erased for the museum, and we try to recover this very important part of the history of art criticism and theories of theoretical development in Latin America.
Juanacha came and worked in the 70s and early 80s in the museum and was crucial in developing not only a language, but also a management style for curating early contemporary arts practices in Latin America and a breaking of form and a new type of collaboration. And he collected a lot at this museum, and all these works were hidden in storage. So there's this centralized art system that the MAM is part of, which is the IMBA, which is this publicly run network that has this very singular narrative on Mexico and Latin America's cultural history. So what we did as the Jacuzzis was sort of intervene that history and place these two pieces together.
As we were trying to recover Juanacha, we were trying to rearticulate certain notion created during the 90s that Mexico was a part, that was as isolated from contemporary art narratives. How to read Mexican art history from another and more economical, political perspective too.
And to put into space these theories. I mean, Daniel's piece was a spatialization of an argument between what the difference was between design and artesanía in Juanacha's writings from the 70s.
I'm really interested in the ways that you're trying to appropriate and use the terms such as organic, sacred, and magical. And the second, if you can elaborate a little bit on those discourses of the 90s.
Hacha, specifically with the term mágico feudal, and something that we activated in the exhibit as the icónico verbal, the verbal iconic, appropriates or sort of reinterprets very popular terminology happening on a global scale and coming from American and European conceptual arts practices, early contemporary arts practices, and changes them and transforms them into something that's more locally driven, where language itself becomes a material tool in these artistic practices. And there's a lot of appropriation of these sort of fantastical, exoticized terms like mágico feudal, organic, or sacred. What's the role of the narrator in that discourse? And is it one, as it was in Mexico in the 90s, of discovery, of a second sort of colonization in which the cultural actor from abroad discovers a cultural history that exists in isolation, and by doing so really tells a narrative of usually himself, but it's a narrative of white European patriarchal cultural history. And that's something that we're constantly trying to combat.
And in the 90s, what happened is with these artists is what happens with the third world when it inserts itself in the NAFTA agreement and in the global market. So this Mexican definition of doing art, the mexicanismo, it changes radically. And we are trying to confront this, like every generation, you try to confront the last ones, but now in a neoliberal context.
And also, it's important, he organized the Latin American Biennale in 1978, and participated in the Havana Biennale too. And the main topics of this exhibition was magic, myth, taking Caribbean, indigenous thinking, and highlighting the folk art and the past ways of produce other ways of cultural material.
Yeah, I'm complementing the answers. I think it's important to situate our confrontation with powerful agents now, maybe with, I don't know if you have explored the book called The Age of Discrepancies, La Era de la Discrepancia.
Second, I'm very struck by your mention of the context in which you work, which you refer to as necro-capitalism. To what, and then the fact that one of the main sort of organizing principles is promiscuity within this context. And is that sort of, did that emerge spontaneously? Is that the best way of dealing with the situation of necropolitics? Is that something that's going to be sustained?
To resist the necrocapitalism in our own context, because definitely we are talking about a little context in Mexico City. Like it's such a different reality in other states and just around the street in our own neighborhood. But what we think it's how to resist that. In the precariousness, it's all about temporality. I don't think the social or artistical movements fail because they end. They are just being in this really thin line about how long are they going to last.
It's important to, this idea of promiscuity gets at the position that we're in right now in contemporary society, in which this centralized narrative after a neoliberal and abstract political and social economy is in place, is one of subtlety and of constant negotiation and of promiscuity. So I think that's...
So